Hello there, Reject Nation. I'm Greg Alba.
And I'm John Humphrey.
We got mics out for The Joker 2019 movie, directed by Todd Phillip, starring Joaquin Phoenix, famous for his portrayal of the bad guy in Gladiator. And some other things.
Yeah. Swing away.
This is one of those reviews I'm nervous about. I thought I might be a little bit more on the conflicted side of how do I really feel? I need time to process this, but honestly, I really know how I feel about this movie, and I want to make sure I say everything correct. I want to make sure I get all my points across, and it's such a thick, complex experience of sorts. Still having a hard time processing all my vocabulary of how I wanted to come across. I'll tell you guys this much. I loved it. I was about halfway through this movie. I looked to my girlfriend Olivia. I was like, how are you feeling about this movie so far? She's like, I love it. I'm like, yeah, I love it too. Because it's an interesting film to watch because it's a challenging experience. You could hear all kinds of different reactions where there's certain audience members who were laughing really hard at some stuff. Moments where when they were laughing, I was kind of pissed they were laughing because I clearly felt very different towards certain scenes. And that's kind of the power in this movie, I think, because of that level. But John, really quick, what would you think overall?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the shoes you expected to be in, which is I don't know exactly where my emotional, experience with this movie is going to settle, but I do think that there is a whole lot of really quality work worth appreciating. It is very striking, and it is very compelling in a very strange kind of way, uncomfortable in a unique way as well. So I think it definitely succeeds at being a unique and a singular experience for sure.
I feel like I prepped myself perfectly for this movie. When this movie was announced, they were talking about Scorsese possibly producing this film and it being in the vein of something like Taxi Driver. Todd Phillips was pretty vocal about how it borrows inspiration from Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. Rather than doing a bunch of comic book research, because I heard that they didn't borrow anything from any comics when adapting this movie.
One time I read all these comics.
Yeah, I read so many Joker comics. When I was getting in the mood to watch this, today's Thursday of filming this, and on Monday I watched Taxi Driver, and I hadn't seen it since the one time when I was a kid. A lot easier to appreciate in your late 20s than it is to appreciate it when you're like 14.
I had to do for an appropriately adult revisit.
And then I also rewatched King of Comedy, which I watched right around the same time. I can definitely see the inspirations, especially with this movie being set in the 80s and sort of the world that, this takes place in Gotham, but it feels like New York from the 80s, a rather cynical, nihilistic world. We kind of like alley-ooped the way to summarize this movie when we were out of the theater. It is its own thing. It wasn't like I was rewatching Taxi Driver or King of Comedy, even though there are scenes where I'm like, oh, that's directly from King of Comedy. Like there are certain choices that completely reminded me of both of those movies.
It's like, what if Rupert Pupkin became Travis Bickle?
If they had a baby,
and you just throw in the Joker instead.
If you threw in like a comic book world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If Taxi Driver and King of Comedy took place in a comic book world.
I think it is important to kind of acknowledge Taxi Driver and King of Comedy because it's very evident that there were approaches to this that were inspired by it. And with those movies, you got Robert De Niro playing two very different types of psychopathic characters who you could tell are very mentally ill and mentally unstable, but the movies don't ever go out of their way to comment on mental illness per se. They're not very direct about it. Whereas this movie is. This guy goes to therapy, or at least he checks in with a psychologist. There's very specific, sometimes on the nose things, but I appreciated it when it was on the nose, actually. I felt it was good to be a little bit expositional about certain things. It is very much talking about mental illness. And that's not to say, because I know there's controversy around this movie. When we were talking about this on the car ride back, I was saying how this movie is really like Arthur Fleck Portrait of a Killer or something like that, I don't think this movie necessarily has a stance as much as it is just doing a portrait of who this guy is, the world he lives in, and yes, because of the world he lives in, there comes with some commentary about the way government treats proper funding or treating those with mental health
people, and how it actually helps a city to thrive, versus just thinking of financial interests and whatnot.
Exactly. And as someone who I'm pretty vocal about it. I've been in therapy I've lost count at this point, and I was diagnosed many years ago, PTSD ADHD, type 2 bipolar, and I've been surrounded by people who have really serious mental health struggles, none to this degree, but, you know, and then you hear about the kind of crimes that are happening in the world today. So I can get why there's controversy surrounding this movie. I think it's only because it's a big blockbuster, or at least it's marketed like a big blockbuster. It has the IP of Joker in it. That's why there's controversy around it.
One of the places I'm kind of conflicted on this movie, because I think it does do a nice job of humanizing and putting this in a world that, is not as broad and comic booky with its motivations, but it is sort of going, okay, we have this neglect, and what happens to a person that grows up in that, and what happens to a person with bad nurture system, no support, and everything is the bare minimum. And I've met people who, seem to be kind of chronically down on their luck. I think the movie does a good job of acknowledging that stuff. I don't think the movie really discusses it much. I think it uses it as flesh for Arthur's character and a time and place setting for everything. Here's what's going on in Gotham right now.
Which is, I think, smarter and better for the movie, personally.
I can see it. I guess, it just...
because the movie sticks strictly to character study of Arthur Fleck.
To me, just the level I came out of this with, I felt like I got a character observation more than a complete study.
That's fair.
Because, the problem is... weirdly, it's funny because I don't think the King of Comedy or Taxi Driver are detrimental comparisons, and I wasn't really thinking about those movies during watching this. The weird thing is I was thinking of You Were Never Really Here, because that's the movie I kept going to for this gets into the psychosis to a level where I'm affected by it more than just I'm observing it. And so I think he does a really good job of acting it out and doing the portrayal. I don't think the writing necessarily does much exploring of it. It just kind of acknowledges that it's there. That's just kind of, what do you want from this?
Yeah, I definitely felt different to it because I heavily connected with the Arthur Fleck character. You've heard everyone say it, even those who don't really like the movie, you've heard them say it, that Joaquin Phoenix is freaking brilliant in this movie, man. I really thought he was incredible. Every single moment, I'm not watching a dude act. I've seen so many interviews of Joaquin Phoenix. I've seen so many different portrayals of characters he's done. This is a full-on transformation of sorts, and it also arcs in a way that's different than I think how you might be led. I don't want to ruin anything. Because it's
hard to discuss.
It's hard not, especially when you watch the trailers, knowing Joker, You have certain expectations of how you expect this movie to necessarily arc, and it doesn't really arc in the... I don't want to say anymore. Bottom line, Joaquin Phoenix, the word that comes to mind literally is pathos. This guy is someone you really sympathize for. And there's a little bit, you said it in the car, there's a little bit of Arthur in all of us in a lot of ways. And there's a certain degree of very specific mental health areas and actions he commits and does and yada, yada, yada. There were times I straight up rooted for him, but never in the realm of people in real life should be going this way,
within the narrative, within the suspension of disbelief of the movie.
Even when he was doing things I was never necessarily shocked by, but I always felt impacted by, I would still understand where he's coming from.
Well, I think that's the deepest point this movie hits, because it does use some relevant ideas, and I think the most relevant of them is this idea. It's that theme of the Joker, that anybody's one bad day away from snapping and becoming potentially this person. We see it in culture now with all these mass shootings and stuff. So well,
he's one bad life away.
and that's I think that's the true flashpoint that is the controversy. Flashpoint.
They're gonna do the next Flash movie, put the Joker in the next Batman movie.
2038, when that Flash movie finally drops. I think that's the linchpin of the controversy.
I got nothing. Sorry, I'm just trying to throw you off.
David Lynch. That's the crux. Horcruxes, Harry Potter. That's the nucleus. Silicon Valley. At the heart of the controversy, I think, is something very interesting about the movie, which is that Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal is horrific and scary at times, but it is also childlike and sad in ways. And you can sympathize with aspects of his character. It's in that broad stroke that the movie goes, we need to take better care of these people, and part of the broken financial system is that people get forgotten, pushed around, and with no support, with no good friends. If you have the right combination of mental disorders or troubles, you might find yourself completely isolated and ready to blow up. And I think that's the most relevant thing this movie touches.
Even if I wasn't fully connected in terms of identifying with the character, I was always fascinated by what was happening with him. And and I do credit Todd Phillips a lot for how this film was captured. The cinematography in this movie was so beautiful. Like, we saw it on IMAX, and I was kind of like, this kind of movie you need to watch on IMAX? It sounds like just a character study film. Yeah. And then you see the way it's shot, you're like, oh, it's well worth watching on IMAX.
Because it's funny. It's in the 80s, and it's the least I've thought about it, because so many things are back in the 80s right now. But this felt like a movie that could have kind of fell out of the 80s.
Yeah, you know? Oh, definitely. Yeah. And there are things, especially with like fleshing out the Gotham world, that they, you know, it's like little subtle touches, like, oh, that thing says Gotham on it. It says Gotham PD. You know, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like, you know, Gotham. You know,
I think there are a lot of really fun, subtle touches, both on the depth side and the just comic book side.
And also, I think what everyone's in agreement on, well, at least they should be, this is a should. I don't care how subjective opinions are. Yeah. The music in this is freaking phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
I was walking out of the theater still hearing the music in my head. It blew my mind away. Very ominous.
Very fraught.
Haunting. I just thought that the way this whole movie is composed, and I feel like that's a good word to use for it. It's a very composed film. It's like we can all talk about subject matter, controversy, and yada, 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 which is, I think, fascinating to walk out of this movie talking about, because there's only a few things that we could say for a spoiler talk that are like comic booky. There's very few. It's so few to the point that when it happened, I kind of wished it wasn't in the movie. And like,
I agree.
Which is kind of weird because I was so into this movie that I didn't view it as a comic book movie, that when a comic book thing happened, which is very, very rare, I was like, I could have done without it.
The most comic book thread this movie has is, the one I would have snooped.
Yeah, and it's not even like take it the whole thing out. It's just a couple of things you could have like just dialed down a little bit. Exactly. The only time when I felt like, it was this when Todd Phillips got a studio note. They let him get away with a lot of shit.
They really let him make it his own. So you got to do some comic book.
But there's a couple of things though we need a comic book of a little bit.
Yeah.
After watching Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, I wasn't like, oh, this is shocking. But then also, like, we grew up on like horror movies, and we've watched films that are like so much more brutal than this. I think it's because it's categorized in the blockbuster train and the audience reach this movie has, why these topics are being brought up with this movie specifically, because of the potential reach it has. Like, Rob Zombie comes out with like the most freaking in-your-face, nihilistic, sinister film you could think of that's just freaking mean. No one's like, hey, we should ban this, you know? But Joker, makes sense. IP, like we've already covered. But the thing is, though, like the violence in this film, the best comparison I can give this movie in terms of like other Jokers without spoiling jack about the film.
Cesar Romero.
He arcs into Cesar Romero.
And then he's hosting the comedy show by the end, you know?
You watch Heath Ledger's Joker, and that's a Joker who is a criminal mastermind, and that is not this portrayal.
No.
This portrayal is a dude with serious psychotic issues. Honestly, this movie I thought did a really good job at humanizing this character that I feel like I'm being kind of insulting by calling him psychotic. But he's not unleashing into like the Heath Ledger Joker or the Jared Leto Joker.
Well,
You're watching a dude with a serious mental disability that when the violence occurs, it's not a gleeful, maniacal.
They're like outbursts.
It hits.
Yeah, it's like the pot boils over.
Yeah, it's like you've seen films that are way more gory than this, but when it happens, it feels realistic. There's no Joker kills a dude with a magic pencil moment.
Yeah,
you know, like all the violence.
No mystique there. It's ugly and it hurts. And it's sinister and sad.
And there's like spoiler moments I would definitely like to go over, but for me, it's a high recommendation, and I could see audiences being split on it. Half the crowd strongly applauded, half the crowd immediately left.
It's fun to walk into a movie really not knowing how you're going to feel afterwards. And I mean, this movie, I definitely, if you're interested at all or if you're involved in the controversy, go see what it is. It's a very striking movie. It's going to take me some time to figure out my actual thoughts. I guess I got the movie I expected, which is kind of one of the keys to my weird mood right now. It's sort of like, I guess the missing element for me was it never felt truly chaotic or unexpected. I never really wasn't able to predict where it was going to go. And I think that is a truly essential part of a Joker. But other than that, I think it is a really interesting achievement for superhero cinema. And I think it's a well-made film overall.
All right, guys. Well, did you see Joker? What did you think about it? Comment below. You guys can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell. Keep a lookout for our spoiler talk. See you guys.